What is your age good for, Martha? Stay home, make soup, keep the cat, and stop dreaming about climbing mountains. My husband said it in the middle of our 40th anniversary dinner, his voice edged with mockery, and the whole table laughed. I laughed too, the kind of laugh people use to cover a fresh tear inside. When the guests left, and I was clearing spilled wine and wilted flowers, I found 2 tickets to Santorini in his suit pocket. A pair, one with his name, the other with Aaron's, the young assistant I had always thought was just a coworker. I stood still for a moment, then walked to the desk, opened the laptop, logged into our joint account, and transferred all the money into my name. No tears, no blame. That night I looked at myself in the mirror, smiled for the first time in years, and thought, if he thinks I'm too old to start over, he's about to see the opposite. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My name is Martha Lane, 65 years old, living in Austin, Texas. I never thought I'd be the woman who starts over at this age. I once believed I had a steady marriage 40 years with Douglas, the man I'd loved since I was 25. We met at a church fundraiser. He was magnetic, a smooth talker with a smile that lit up the room. I was a simple elementary school teacher, then brown hair, a crew-neck sweater so shy I blushed when he asked me to dance. 40 years have passed since that dance. We married, bought a small house in the suburbs, and built a life. 2 children, a rose garden out back, and weekend picnics. I thought I was lucky. Douglas could be hot-tempered and a bit arrogant, but he was hard-working and driven. I was content to stand behind him, keep the home fires burning, cook warm dinners, and always have his coat ready when it turned cold. There was one thing I didn't see when people get used to being loved. They start to think that love is permanent. I don't know exactly when Douglas began to change. Maybe after he retired. He had been the CEO of a construction company, admired for being decisive and successful. When the nameplate came off his office door, I thought we would finally have time together. Douglas didn't. He hated quiet. He hated being forgotten. And I, the wife beside him for 4 decades, became a mirror of the thing he feared most: aging. He started spending hours at the gym, chatting with younger friends, complaining that I just stayed in the kitchen and wasn't interested in anything new. At first, I brushed it off. I thought it was a midlife crisis, but his words grew into small, slow, cold cuts. You don't understand business. You don't know anything about luxury travel. Someone your age shouldn't be driving long distances. I smiled, nodded, cleared the table, washed the dishes. Inside, I felt myself shrinking a little each day. And then, that night, our 40th anniversary, I realized my marriage had died. It just hadn't been buried. We held a small dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant. Douglas wore a deep blue suit with a bow tie, still looking dapper. He was lively, joking, and trotted out fun memories that made me the punchline. Martha didn't know how to open the GPS. She thought Pisa was in Paris. Everyone laughed. I laughed along. In that laughter, I heard the cruelty of a man who once promised to cherish me. When I mentioned my dream of going to Greece, something I'd said for years, he looked at me and said it. What is your age good for, Martha? Stay home, make soup, keep the cat, and stop dreaming about climbing mountains. The table roared. I stayed quiet, forced a smile, and felt something collapse inside. That night, when everyone was gone, the room smelled of old wine and wilted flowers. I cleared the table, wiped the glasses, and picked up a napkin on a chair. 2 papers slid out of his suit pocket. Plane tickets to Santorini. I read, carefully. 2 tickets. One name, Douglas Lane. The other, Aaron Miller. I didn't shake. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I felt a strange stillness, as if the whole world had gone silent. Erin, the young assistant who called me Mrs. Lane with a sweet smile and evasive eyes. I once thought she admired my husband like a mentor. He was taking her to the place I had longed to see. I sat down, laid the tickets on the table, and looked around the home we built. Wedding photos, keepsakes, vases, his framed honors on the wall. Suddenly, all of it felt foreign. I no longer saw a home. I saw the house of a man who once loved me and then forgot I existed. I stood up and went straight to his office, opened the computer, logged into the joint bank account. I'd managed our finances for years. There wasn't a password I didn't know. The balance popped up 6 figures, part from our retirement, part from savings. He assumed I would never touch it. He assumed I would always be reasonable. He was wrong. I moved all the money into my own account, the one he didn't know about. When the screen showed "transaction completed," my heart sped up. Not from fear, from release. No tears. No blame. Only quiet. I went to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. Gray hair. Lines around my mouth. Eyes still bright. I put a hand on my chest, listened to my steady heartbeat, and smiled. For the first time in years, I saw a real woman looking back, not someone's shadow. I whispered, "If he thinks I'm too old to start over, he's about to see the opposite." I turned off the light, stepped out, and went to bed in a strange peace. Outside the window, Austin glowed in the night, and for the first time in decades, I felt myself breathing, truly breathing. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I knew one thing for sure. I would never again be the obedient wife he thought he knew. I met Douglas in the spring when I was 25. Austin was proud, still a small city then. Coffee shops smelled of pine, and country songs played on old radios. I had just graduated and was teaching elementary school. He was 27, managing a construction company that was growing fast. He swept in like a gust of wind, engaging, confident eyes, a smile that made you feel special. I remember that church fundraiser he asked me to dance, held my hand firmly, and said, "Your eyes make a man want to stay." I believed that line for half my life. We married 8 months later. A small, simple, warm wedding. I still have the photo, me in lace, Douglas gripping my hand, looking at me like the world was just us two. Back then I thought happiness meant this: build a home with the one you love, buy a house, have children, live quietly to the end. I didn't know happiness often doesn't die from disaster, but from tiny cracks no one notices. The early years were good. Douglas was diligent and ambitious. I backed every planned company, expansion, long business trips. When he traveled, I taught, raised the kids, paid the bills, cooked, kept everything running. I beamed when he took the stage for a state business award, hearing them thank the wife who stands behind him. I used to think that was an honor. But when a man gets used to applause, he forgets who kept the house from collapsing. Douglas changed, not with fights, but with gentle neglect. He stopped asking about my day, stopped noticing the small things I did to make him happy. Quiet dinners replaced conversations. He came home late, busy on his phone, sometimes greeting me with a nod. I set the table, poured the wine, waited, and told myself this was a tough season at work. Work made him richer and took him further from me. Douglas loved attention. At parties, he talked, joked, and craved admiring eyes. I stood beside him and smiled, the backdrop. When someone called me a lucky woman, he chuckled. "No, I'm the lucky one." I knew it. It wasn't true anymore. It was a line to save face. When the kids grew up and moved out, the house felt too big. I thought we'd finally have time together, travel, garden, read. Douglas couldn't stand the quiet. He needed applause, lights, and new people to prove he was still desirable. After retiring, he joined a golf club, old business groups, and mixers with younger colleagues. I liked mornings in the garden, afternoons cooking, evenings with old movies. Two parallel worlds, no conflict, no connection. I remember asking, "Do you miss sitting on the porch listening to crickets?" He brushed it off. "You still like all that quiet stuff?" "I need something more exciting." I never brought up old times again. Then he started criticizing me. It began as light jokes. "You don't get tech. Let me choose the restaurant. You don't know European food." Those jokes turned into weapons. "You dress like you're 70. Don't try dark lipstick. It doesn't suit you. Who even reads a paper anymore? So outdated." At first I was sad. Then I felt like a stranger in my own house. I tried to fix things, cooked his favorites, went to movies with him, asked about his new friends. He responded with polite indifference, the way you talk to someone you've known too long to care. I still remember my 60th birthday, just the two of us. I cooked, arranged flowers, bought his favorite red wine. As I cut the cake, he took a call. I heard laughter through the glass door. When he came back, he said, "Sorry, a friend wants me for golf this weekend." "No, happy birthday." I stared at the candle burning out. No fight, no tears, just a chill like cold ash. After that I realized, love doesn't vanish in a day. It erodes piece by piece. Each insult, each time he looked at me like an old object, love inside me lost another shard. I clung to habit anyway. People love so long they fear losing it even when it's already dead. When Douglas fully retired, things got worse. He was restless and irritable, complained about everything. Meals, the news, the weather, even me. "You speak too softly. It's tiring," he snapped. "You don't get the times. Don't give advice." I sat with my tea and stayed quiet. I wondered, is silence a way to keep peace? Or a way to bury myself deeper? The answer came slowly. Surely. One morning, I was planting lavender out front. Douglas stepped out and said, "Do you ever think you're wasting your time?" I looked up. Wasting time on what? On things no one cares about. Flowers, baking, books. "Do something practical, Martha." I didn't answer. I smiled and kept packing soil around the roots. In that moment I knew, the man who once loved me for my gentleness now despised it. I kept trying, like many wives do. I thought if I was patient and loving, he'd see it. He didn't. His cruelty wasn't in shouting, it was in not seeing me. Every time he walked past, without turning back, every time he ate without saying thank you, I felt smaller. Our love, if we can call it that, turned into habit. A tired routine, smooth like an old clock that still runs though its hands are rusted. I woke, made coffee. He read the paper. I asked, "Sleep well?" He grunted. I cooked dinner, he ate, and said, "It's fine." The script played on, stale and emotionless. Some nights I woke and looked over. He lay still, breathing heavy, back turned. I realized we were two strangers sharing a house. I stared at the ceiling and asked myself, is this marriage or a cell we choose to live in? Day by day, his cruelty stopped hurting me. It made me tired. Too tired to be sad. I learned to stay quiet, smile at the right time, and avoid conflict. I thought I was preserving happiness, but I was only covering a cold house. Douglas liked to say, "Marriage is stability." In his version of stability, I was part of the furniture, something he assumed would always be there. I once read that a marriage doesn't die from betrayal. It dies when one person stops looking at the other with love. I had seen that in his eyes for a long time, I just refused to admit it. Until that anniversary dinner when he said, "What is your age good for, Martha?" I realized the man across from me wasn't my husband anymore. He was a memory of someone who once loved me. The body belonged to the world out there. So I cleared away the last illusions. No yelling, no blame, no pleading. I simply stepped out of the role I'd played for 40 years. Because sometimes, when love has been dead a long time, silence is the final right. After that night, things changed between us, not with an explosion, but with a long, suffocating hush. Douglas started coming home later than usual. At first, he said he was meeting old friends in investing. I believed him, or pretended to, because believing is easier than facing the truth. The meetings stretched to 10-11 p.m. Sometimes later, with a trace of perfume on his collar that wasn't mine. I asked softly, "Who keeps you out this late, Douglas?" He shrugged without looking at me. "Don't start doubting me, okay? Some friends are launching a new project. I'm just advising." I nodded. That night, while putting away his jacket, I found a receipt from an upscale Italian restaurant downtown, the place we used to go when we were in love. 2 glasses of wine, 2 entrees, 1 tiramisu. No, client has dinner like that with a consultant. I folded the receipt and placed it in the wooden nightstand drawer. It was my first saved proof, not to expose him, but to remind myself I wasn't crazy. When a woman lives in lies long enough, she needs evidence to believe her own instincts. In the days that followed, he kept coming home late, still calling them investment meetings. His phone stayed on silent, screen glowing blue while he typed at midnight. I lay, with my back turned, pretending to sleep, listening to the taps and small laughs between stretches of quiet. Sometimes I heard him say into the phone, voice lower than usual, "I miss you." Then silence. Then a long sigh that stung. I didn't ask again. My silence made him comfortable. That's what I realized. Men often mistake a wife's silence for acceptance, not knowing it can be the start of a storm. Then she appeared, Aaron Miller, his former assistant. Young, energetic, soft curls, pink gloss smile. The first time she stopped by with documents, she called me Mrs. Lane with syrupy sweetness and avoided my eyes. Douglas stood beside her, oddly restless. He said quickly, "Aaron just needs to go over something. You don't have to stay up, Martha." I smiled lightly. "I'm making tea. Would you like some?" She shook her head. He added, "No need. It'll just be a minute." They went into his office and closed the door. I stood in the kitchen with the teapot in my hand, heard a small laugh, then a long stretch of silence. When she left, he dodged my eyes and changed the subject. After that, Aaron was around more. Calls, texts, files at odd hours. One morning I heard her voice on the phone, too gentle, too familiar. I didn't say a word. I started writing. I bought a small brown leather notebook and kept it in my nightstand. Every odd thing went in it. Dates, times, the excuses he gave, and the small details, receipts, perfume, hastily deleted messages. I didn't write to accuse. I wrote to remind myself this was really happening. Then one day, checking the bank account, I saw steady weekly withdrawals from our joint fund, the same round number, not small. I didn't ask. I printed the statements and sealed them in an envelope under the leather notebook. He thought I never noticed because for years he handled the big finances. But I paid every bill and balanced every line. I knew where every dollar went. Now I knew this. Douglas was building a different life, one without me. The signs became too clear to ignore. One night after a meeting, I saw a faint lipstick mark on his white shirt collar. He said it was red wine, but I've washed his shirts for 40 years. I know the difference. I didn't get angry. I folded the shirt neatly and put it back in his closet without a word. My calm seemed to embolden him. The house became his hotel. Out early, home late, sometimes not at all. When I asked, he smirked. "Why be suspicious, Martha? I'm busy." "Don't be jealous. You're not young enough to understand business." That line, "You're not young enough," was a dull knife. It didn't slash, it carved. I nodded, turned away, and hid my trembling hands. After that, I woke earlier than usual. When the first light came into the kitchen, I made coffee, and sat at the old wooden table with my leather notebook. I reread my entries: dates, times, places, receipts, transactions, the first small tracks of betrayal, laid out in order. Nothing shocking, just plain truth on a page. I exhaled. Some pain can't cry, it can only be recorded. From then on, I watched him with new eyes. The extra minutes fixing his hair, checking his teeth, spraying cologne, glancing at his phone when he thought I wasn't looking. I used to know every gesture of this man. Now, each one felt foreign. One afternoon, he fell asleep on the sofa. His phone buzzed nonstop. The screen lit with a text. "Are you asleep? I miss your laugh." I stared at the words, heard my heartbeat, took a photo, and emailed it to myself. Then I put the phone back, as if I'd never touched it. No one teaches you how to handle betrayal at 65. People say keep the peace at this age. What peace is there when the person beside you gives his smile to someone else? I started gathering everything, not to take revenge, but to be ready. Like seeing a storm offshore. You don't scream, you shutter the windows and tie down the roof. I organized documents, statements, contracts, and deeds. Whenever he left, I opened the safe, snapped photos, and put everything back exactly. No one knew. He had no clue. To him, I was still the gentle, dependent wife. I learned to be silent to survive and to plan. One night, on the phone in his office, he chuckled, "She'll never suspect a thing." Don't worry. She trusts me completely. I sat in the dark kitchen and listened to each word like a farewell. Not a farewell to love, a farewell to the naive woman I used to be. After that, I stopped trying to fix anything. I watched, I waited. I let him grow bolder, let him believe I was still a compliant shadow. Each night I added lines to the notebook, taped in receipts, marked the time. Outside, the lavender by the porch began to bloom. I tended it every morning, watching the small purple flowers tremble in the breeze. Strangely, I didn't hurt anymore. Only clarity, cold but clear. I knew that. Soon I wouldn't need to pretend to be calm. The pretense itself would be the perfect cover for a plan he would never see coming. Douglas kept coming and going, smiling as if nothing in the house had changed. He didn't know that in every corner, every notebook line, every printed statement, I was laying the first bricks for what was next, a new life mine without him. The day I found 2 tickets to Santorini, I knew we had reached the point of no return. There was nothing left to save, no reason to wait. All the doubts, the notes in my little notebook, the receipts and screenshot messages, they had all come together into a complete picture. Douglas didn't just betray me emotionally. He betrayed me deliberately by taking another woman to the very place I had dreamed of going with him. I sat on the living room couch, the 2 tickets still on the table, the light from the window making the words Austin, Santorini glint with ridicule. Her name was printed clearly under Passenger 2, Aaron Miller. I read it over and over, as if my mind needed time to carve it into memory one more time to never forget. That evening, Douglas came home late as usual. Seeing me folding laundry on the sofa, he said in a flat voice, "I have to go to Europe for 2 weeks, a few meetings with old partners." I looked up at him and asked softly, "Where in Europe?" He answered without blinking, "Italy, then Greece. I'll be busy, don't wait up." I smiled a light smile like a breeze, the one he'd known for decades. "Is that so? Remember to bring a coat. Europe is still cold in April." He nodded, perhaps a little surprised that I didn't ask more. I knew exactly what he was thinking. He thought I was still the gentle, gullible wife who would see him off at the door with reminders and a habitual kiss. And I let him think so. 3 days later, Douglas packed his suitcase. He chose new shirts, sprayed extra cologne, checked his passport, tickets, And cash. He gave me a perfunctory kiss before stepping out, that cologne, a scent I had begun to hate, drifting past and disappearing with the slam of the car door. The engine started and faded away. I stood at the window watching, not a tear, not a sigh. What came first wasn't pain, but relief. For years I had lived in a cage made of contempt. And now, with the door open, all I wanted was to take a deep breath and know I was still alive. I went into the office and turned on the computer. The screen lit up, the familiar numbers appeared. I logged into the bank. In the transaction list, I saw recent charges: gifts, restaurants, hotels, the names hidden beneath codes. Each number felt like a cut. I pressed a few keys, froze all of Douglas's secondary cards, changed the access codes, and moved the money into my own account. In the instant the transfer was confirmed, I felt like I had just taken chains off my wrists. For so many years I managed our family's money but never truly owned it. Today I did not out of greed, but to protect the rest of my life. The next morning I called the bank to block all of Douglas's access. The representative's voice was polite. "Are you sure you want to temporarily lock your husband's secondary account, Mrs. Lane?" I answered calmly, "I'm sure. Very sure." Then I picked up the phone and called an old acquaintance, Mr. Collins, who owned a dealership in South Austin. Douglas's black sports car was his greatest pride. He used to say, "This car makes me feel young again." I smiled at the memory. "Then let's see how he feels when it's gone." I asked Mr. Collins to come see the car that day. When he arrived, I handed over the title all in my name because I had bought it for Douglas's birthday long enough ago that he'd forgotten. "Nice car. Are you sure you want to sell it?" "I'm sure. I need to make room for something new." I said it so evenly that I surprised even myself. Mr. Collins offered a fair price. I signed the paperwork and handed him the keys. As the car rolled out of the gate, the afternoon sun flashed on the paint so brightly I could see my face in it. That face no longer looked afraid, only peaceful. I chose silence in exchange for a clean counterstrike. Do you agree with what I did? If not, how would you do it differently? I truly want to know your answer. I went back inside, poured a cup of chamomile tea, and sat by the window. In my mind, I pictured Douglas walking the cobblestone streets of Santorini, hand in hand with her, believing he'd outsmarted his foolish old wife. He didn't know that every step he took there was a step I used to prepare to leave his life. That afternoon, I called an old friend, Judith, who had worked at a law office. I was direct. "I need a good, discreet divorce attorney." She hesitated, then replied, "I know someone. Catherine Boyd. She's very trustworthy." I wrote down the number and scheduled to meet Catherine the next morning. That night, I opened the desk drawer and took out the brown leather notebook, the place where I had kept all the evidence over time. Restaurant receipts, bank statements, screenshot messages, lipstick on his collar. I arranged them carefully into a folder. As I pulled the zipper closed, it felt like closing a chapter of my life. The next morning, I went to the law office. Catherine Boyd was in her early 50s, with bright eyes and a steady, low voice. I told her everything, from the belittling comments to the proof of betrayal. She listened in silence, occasionally taking notes, never interrupting. When I finished, she simply said, "You've already done the hardest part, Martha. The rest is procedure." Hearing that, my shoulders loosened. Maybe because for the first time in years, someone was on my side. Catherine helped me begin the divorce process quietly. She guided me to separate accounts, list assets, and file with the court. At the right time. I listened, took notes, and followed through. One action at a time, careful, quiet. When I stepped outside, the wind picked up, carrying the smell of coffee from a nearby shop. I stood on the sidewalk, watching people pass, and realized I wasn't trembling anymore. I was stepping into a new world, one I would steer. 3 days later, when the paperwork was nearly done, I opened the drawer and took out my wedding ring. The worn gold band was engraved, "Forever yours." I held it in my hand. It felt cold. For 40 years, I believed that promise so much, I forgot I deserved to be loved as a person. I placed the ring in a wooden box, locked it, and put it in the bottom drawer. Not to keep a memory, but to remind myself that love without respect is only a shadow of the past. In the days that followed, I inventoried every document in the house: the deed, shares, insurance, retirement plans. I photographed each page, saved them to a USB drive, and hid it in an old book Douglas never read. Each action was small, but each one made me feel alive again. I was no longer a passive woman. I was writing my life over. On Saturday afternoon, I sat in the living room as slanting sunlight poured through the window, bathing everything in a honey gold glow. On the table, there were no plane tickets, no papers of his, only a teacup, an open notebook, and the line I'd just written: "When people think you're weak, that's exactly when you're at your strongest." I looked up through the glass. Outside, a light breeze stirred the lavender stems. I smiled. After 40 years of being bound, I finally understood. Freedom isn't running away, it's staying and changing the game. And in that quiet house, for the first time in years, I felt something I'd almost forgotten: a tremor of happiness. Not the happiness of being loved, but of learning to love myself again. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. Thin spring light filtered through the curtains and fell across the wooden table where I had sat so many nights, planning my new life. On the table, next to a steaming cup of chamomile tea, was a white envelope. Inside was the cashier's check I planned to withdraw today. I put on a pale blue blouse and slacks, tied my hair back neatly, and looked in the mirror. No concealer, no trying to look younger. I just wanted to see myself a 65-year-old woman who had lived through enough pain to recognize peace. When I stepped outside, the Texas sky was startlingly blue. A light breeze carried the scent of fresh grass, and for the first time in years, I felt a flutter in my chest. I drove to the bank, a place I'd visited hundreds of times, but today, each step through the glass doors felt like stepping into a new chapter. The teller counter was bright as always, with a hint of coffee in the air. A young teller with her blonde hair tied back looked up and smiled. "Good morning, Mrs. Lane. How can I help you today?" I answered in a calm but steady voice. "I'd like to withdraw funds from the joint account and open a new account, in my name only." She paused for a beat, then nodded quickly. "Of course. May I see your ID?" I set my ID on the counter. As her pen moved across the form, my eyes fell on the bold words, "Primary account holder, Martha Lane." Just a few words, but they caught in my throat. "How much would you like to withdraw?" she asked, eyes on the screen. I looked directly at her and said gently but firmly, "All of it." She glanced up, a flicker of surprise, then a small smile. "I understand." When the check printed, she set it before me with a silver pen. "Please sign here, Mrs. Lane." I took the pen. My hand trembled, not from fear, but from emotion. I've signed thousands of things in my life: bills, letters, papers on my husband's behalf, but this was the first time I signed purely as myself. No one behind me, no one allowing, no one supervising. When the last stroke closed, I exhaled. It felt like stepping out of a dark room after 40 years. The teller handed me the envelope with the check and a new card, still smelling like fresh plastic. "Congratulations, your account is active. From now on, you have full control." I smiled and took the envelope. Power spread through me, not the power to rule anyone, but the quiet power of freedom. In that moment, I felt myself standing between two worlds. On one side, the woman who endured. On the other, the woman learning to live for herself. Outside, Noon sunlight washed the trees, turning the air golden. I stood on the steps and took a deep breath. It wasn't joy or excitement, it was a strange serenity, like when the last storm has passed and the ground is yours again. On the way home, I turned into the mall, a place I rarely visited unless Douglas wanted to buy something. I didn't plan to buy anything, just to walk. But when I passed a boutique window, a dress made me stop. It was a long dress in wine red, a color Douglas used to say older women shouldn't wear. I remembered him saying at a party, "Red is too loud on you. It doesn't suit your age." I hadn't touched red in 20 years. Today, I walked in. The young clerk smiled. "That color looks great on you. Want to try it?" I smiled. "No need to try. I'm sure." The fabric felt smooth in my hands, light yet warm. I brought it to the counter and paid with my new card, the one that said Martha Lane, and no one else. I didn't get in the car right away. I walked along the street, the breeze lifting a few strands of hair, sunlight bouncing off the glass. For a moment, I saw my reflection. Not the 65-year-old woman he called old and outdated, but the 30-year-old I once was, confident, alive, needing no one's permission to feel beautiful. I stopped at a small corner cafe and ordered a cappuccino. By the window, I watched. People pass and ran a hand over the new dress. I felt like I was living for the first time. No longer someone's wife. No longer a shadow behind a man. I was just me, whole, independent, free. On the table was the notebook I still carry out of habit. I opened it and wrote, "Today I was born again." I paused, reread it, and smiled. If anyone asked how I took revenge, I'd say, I didn't need revenge. I just needed to live so well he'd realize what he lost. I sat there a long time, watching the light change on the wall, hearing cups clink, and feeling a quiet, steady heartbeat. A new feeling, not rage, not bitterness, just a silent, powerful rebirth. As afternoon came on, I stepped out, the dress fluttering in the breeze. The road ahead was long and bright, no longer the familiar path back to a house heavy with memories, but a road open to the second half of my life. I knew that from now on my days wouldn't revolve around duties or roles. I would relearn how to love myself, how to savor an unhurried cup of coffee, how to walk without asking permission. When I opened the car door, the last light of day lit the red dress like a small flame. I said softly to myself, sometimes the best revenge isn't making someone else hurt, it's bringing yourself back to life, brighter than ever. As the car rolled forward, I turned up an old song one Douglas used to hate and call corny. I cranked it loud and sang along, my voice rough in the late sun. No one to interrupt, no one to frown. Just me, a 65-year-old woman laughing to herself on the highway, feeling truly free for the first time. On Monday morning, I went to Catherine Boyd's office, the attorney Judith recommended. It was in an old red brick building downtown, tall windows casting soft light onto plants along the hall. The space felt both formal and warm, and I no longer felt like a wife suing her husband, but a woman about to start a new life. Catherine greeted me with a small smile and very bright eyes. She was in her early 50s, short brown hair, confident and sharp. Her handshake was warm and firm. "I'm Catherine. Judith told me a little. Please have a seat." Her office was simple and tidy, a few small paintings on the wall. On her desk, a stack of files, a fountain pen, a steaming cup of coffee. She pulled out a chair, looked straight at me, and said in a low, clear voice, "First, I want to say this. You've already done the hard part. You stepped out. Not everyone can do that after 40 years of marriage." I gave a small, hoarse laugh. "I wouldn't call it brave. Just, I've had enough." Catherine nodded, didn't interrupt. The way she listened made me feel safe, like someone finally understood. I opened my bag and took out the folder I'd prepared. Bank statements, restaurant receipts, screenshots, and printed copies of the 2 Santorini tickets. I laid them out neatly, quietly, like presenting evidence in a case, which it was, except the defendant was the man I'd slept beside half my life. Catherine turned each page, jotting quick notes in red. Her voice stayed calm and decisive. "This is a very solid file, Martha. With this evidence, we can prove infidelity and financial deception. Do you want a contested divorce, or do you prefer to end it quietly?" I looked at her and spoke slowly. "I don't need noise. I just want my share. And my freedom. Then we'll proceed discreetly. I'll draft the petition and file within 2 days. After that, we'll just need signatures. How long until he finds out?" "Once filed, notice will be mailed to his address a few days. He'll be shocked, I'm sure." I pressed my lips together, a mix of bitterness and relief. "He's always thought I'd never dare." Catherine gave a faint, reassuring smile. "Most men like that do. Their biggest mistake is underestimating a woman when..." She's silent. I clenched my hands in my lap. Yes, I had been silent too long, and that silence had made him feel safe. Not anymore. We reviewed the assets. The house, Douglas's shares in his former company, retirement funds, savings. I produced copies of everything I'd prepared. Catherine took careful notes, occasionally looking up to ask small details. Each question pulled me deeper into reality, one I was now ready to face. "I'll need your signature on the formal petition," Catherine said, placing papers before me. "Today is just a preliminary version, but it takes effect once we file." I looked at the page. The bold line at the top read, "Petition for divorce." Years ago, the word alone might have made me shake. Today, my hand was steady. I took a breath, picked up the pen, and signed, "Martha Lane." No tremor. No hesitation. Catherine watched and nodded slowly. "Good. You know, most of my clients cry at this moment. But you're different." I smiled faintly. "I've cried all my tears. Now I just want to live." She smiled back, then said softly, "Douglas will be shocked when he learns what you've done." I lifted my head, voice even. He's always thought I was weak. His biggest mistake. We were quiet for a few seconds. Outside, wind brushed the windows, traffic murmured. In that room, I felt a kind of energy, not loud or fierce, but steady and warm. Maybe it's the strength found in women who endured too long and finally chose to stand up. Catherine gathered the files and looked at me with empathy. "Martha, you remind me of my mother. She lived in her husband's shadow for 30 years, until one day she left with a single suitcase. Signing this paper, sometimes it's the way to begin again." I nodded. "I understand, and I think I've just begun." She stood and offered her hand. "I'm honored to stand with you. Let me handle the legal side. You go live." We shook hands again. Her hand was warm and strong. In that moment, I didn't feel alone anymore. When I stepped out of the building, the Texas sun blazed. Light flashed on the glass so bright I had to squint, but I didn't turn away. I let the sun hit my face, warm and glaring like a baptism in light. I paused on the steps and took a deep breath. The city was still noisy, people still rushing, but for me everything seemed slower. In my hand was a copy of the divorce petition. In my heart was a quiet I had never known. Maybe this is what people mean by freedom, not when you leave, but when you stop being afraid. I walked down to the sidewalk, the red dress fluttering in the wind. Each step felt like breaking another invisible cord that had bound me for 40 years. In the harsh midday sun, I saw my shadow on the pavement, straight, clear, no longer hidden behind anyone else. I thought of Douglas, of the moment he'd open his mailbox and see my name on the petition. Not a reproach, not a plea, just a dry line powerful enough to end everything. I pictured his face, eyes wide, lips pressed, arrogance collapsing in an instant. The thought didn't make me gloat. It made me serene. I smiled and whispered, like a farewell, "This is the first time in my life, Douglas, that I signed my name and it didn't belong to you." Then I turned and walked into the Texas sunlight, feeling it wrap around me like a blessing. I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time in decades, I know this: I'm not afraid of anything anymore. When Douglas left, the house that had once made me feel suffocated turned quiet in a different way, not the heavy kind of silence, but the clear hush of an early summer morning. No more slamming doors, no more weary sighs, no more voice complaining that the coffee was too strong or the breakfast too bland. Only the wind slipping through the window frame, and my heartbeat, light as a whisper, "You're free now, Martha." At first, that quiet unsettled me. I was used to his footsteps, used to the sound of keys turning in the lock every night. But a few days later, I began to realize that his absence brought back something I had forgotten: space to live for myself. Every morning, I brewed a small pot of coffee, just for me. Not the bitter kind Douglas liked, but something lighter, vanilla coffee, sweet and fragrant. I opened the window to let the early sun pour into the kitchen. The golden light spread across the table, over the white porcelain cup, over my hands. I turned on the old radio. A soft jazz tune rose like a sigh, and I sat there, taking small sips, listening to sparrows outside the porch. Strangely, the things I once thought were small became sacred. I started to tidy the house, not for anyone else, but because I wanted it to reflect who I am. I took down the photos Douglas had hung portraits of him at award ceremonies, in the office, the kind of pictures he liked because they looked prestigious. I replaced them with old photos. My children when they were little, a beach trip with friends, and a picture of me at 25, messy hair, sand on my face, but a radiant smile. In the afternoon, I went to the garden. The garden Douglas used to call a waste of time. I reclaimed old flower beds and turned the dry soil. At first my hands trembled from being out of practice, but when the smell of fresh earth mixed with lavender, I felt my heart soften. I planted tulips, roses, and a few pots of white daisies. I called that garden my second spring. Then I learned to paint. One afternoon I passed the neighborhood community center and saw a sign, "Beginners Painting Class All Ages." I stood at the door for a long moment, then walked in. The teacher, a woman about 40, greeted me with a smile. "It's been a while since I've seen someone come to class with eyes that eager." I laughed and answered, "Maybe because I forgot I could still start something new." The first time I held a brush, my hand shook, but after a few strokes, I found peace in each line. No one there to say, "That's ugly," no one to tell me I was wasting time. Just colors, canvas, and the steady sound of my own breathing. When I finished the first painting, just a vase on a table, I burst into tears. Not because it was beautiful, but because I felt I had recovered a piece of my soul I'd dropped somewhere in the years of being a dutiful wife. In the late afternoons, I rolled out a yoga mat in the living room. Sunlight stretched across the wood floor, and I followed a video on the screen slowly, breath by breath. At first, my knees creaked, but I was patient. After a few days, I felt more flexible, lighter, and strangest of all, happier. I wasn't exercising to get younger, not to impress anyone, just to feel alive in this body. I started calling old friends. The ones Douglas never liked because they talk too much and are fake. Optimists. I called Helen, my college friend I'd lost touch with for nearly 20 years. She answered, her voice bursting with surprise. "Martha? Is that Martha Lane? I thought you disappeared from the world." I laughed. "No, I was just held hostage for a while. I've been released now." We laughed like two young girls. Helen invited me over for dinner. I brought a bottle of red wine. That night, we talked without stopping. About the old days, about life, about the things no one teaches women they have the right to do. When I told her about the divorce, Helen held my hand, her eyes bright. "I'm proud of you. Not because you left him, but because you chose yourself." Her words left me quiet. That's right. I chose myself. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty for it. Day by day, I fell in love with peaceful mornings again. I woke early, threw the windows wide open, took a deep breath, and let sunlight and the scent of flowers pour in. I filled the house with music, jazz, country, even old love songs Douglas used to call corny. I played them loud and sang while making coffee. No one frowned. No one said, "Keep it down." Just me and the birds outside weaving a soundtrack for old age. Once, while I was trimming flowers, my neighbor, Betty, who's lived next door for more than 20 years, stopped by. She leaned on the wooden fence and grinned. "You look different, Martha. I've never seen you this happy." I looked up, hands dirty with soil, hair damp with sweat, and smiled softly. "I just learned how to breathe, Betty." She chuckled and teased. "So the secret to happiness is learning how to breathe?" I nodded. "Yeah, I've spent my whole life breathing for other people. Now I finally know what it's like to take a breath just for me." She looked at me for a long time, then said quietly, "You make me believe people can start over at any age." After she left, I sat by the flower bed, watching the newly opened tulips. Sunlight lit each bright red petal, and I realized freedom doesn't come from leaving someone. It comes from the moment you stop asking permission to live. In the evening, I opened my journal and wrote a few lines. Freedom isn't loud or performative. It's the coffee you brew yourself, the music you choose, the breeze you let touch your cheek. And when peace returns, you don't want revenge, you just want to thank yourself for not giving up. I set down the pen, closed the notebook, and looked around the house glowing with soft lamplight. For 40 years, I used to fear the dark when Douglas traveled, but now I love it because it's quiet, because it's mine. On the table, the frame I'd just painted was still wet. A woman standing in a garden, arms open to the wind. I looked at it and smiled. Turns out, the woman in the painting was me, the one who just relearned how to breathe, how to live, and how to love her own life. And in that little house in Austin, amid lavender and the sound of insects outside the porch, I knew one thing for sure. Freedom isn't a prize after divorce. It's a life I should have had long ago. That morning, sunlight lay gold across the porch as always. I was putting a few fresh lavender sprigs into a glass vase when the phone rang. The screen showed the name Douglas Lane. A brief stillness swept over me. I looked at that name and felt no stab, just the sense of seeing a stranger I once knew. I picked up. "Hello." His voice came bright and noisy, like he was in the middle of a party. "Martha, everything at home okay? I just wanted to make sure you're..." "All right," I chuckled softly, my tone as light as talking about the weather. "Everything's fine, Douglas. Enjoy your trip." On his end, he laughed loudly. I could hear glasses clinking. Then his voice came mixed with the sound of waves. "You know, this place is stunning. The sea is so blue. The wine is better than I imagined. I'm at a restaurant right on the cliff. The view is all Santorini." I listened, but my mind no longer pictured what he described. Santorini, a place I once dreamed of going with him, was now just the backdrop to betrayal. His voice kept going, excited like a child set free. "People really know how to live here, Martha. They don't care about age. They enjoy every second. You should see the sky. The sunsets are on fire." Suddenly, laughter rang out beside him. A young, clear, sweet voice, and then his tone dropped. "Aaron, don't let me finish this call." A brief silence. I heard wine being poured and waves rolling in steady rhythm. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Everything I needed to know was in those sounds. He cleared his throat and tried to sound normal. I just called to make sure you're doing well." I answered, still calm and even. "I'm well, and you enjoy your vacation. You deserve it." I heard him laugh, a sound at once smug and careless. Then he said, likely not noticing the change in how I addressed him, "I'll bring you a gift, maybe a Greek silk scarf. You like ocean blue, right?" I replied softly, "No need, Douglas. I already have everything I need." A slight hesitation on the line. I imagined him frowning, trying to figure out what sounded different in my voice. But then he chuckled it off. "You're always so modest. Anyway, I've gotta go. See you when I'm back." I just said, "Sure, see you." The call ended. The dial tone clicked. Neat, as a period closing a long, rotten chapter. I set the phone down, sat still for a few seconds, then laughed. Not a bitter laugh, a relieved one, the kind you make when you've slipped out of a dark room and don't carry any resentment with you. I brewed another cup of coffee. The aroma filled the room, mixing with the lavender from the porch. In my mind, I saw Douglas on a Santorini balcony, a glass of wine in hand, the blonde secretary leaning into his shoulder. They probably thought they were living in a romantic movie. And me? I was living a real-life one where I was no longer a supporting character. That afternoon, Catherine called. "Martha, the court has approved the asset filings. We just need a few final signatures and we're done." I went to the office that same day. The room was as bright as the first time, but I felt different, no nerves, no unease. I sat down and read carefully through each page. Every line was a track of the past being unfastened. When Catherine slid the pen toward me, she said softly, "Once you sign here, everything will officially belong to you. The accounts, the house, the shares, all of it." I nodded and picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. I signed my name in firm, clear strokes. The words Martha Lane stood whole, like a declaration. When I finished, Catherine smiled. "I've seen many people sign in tears, but you're different. You sign like you're opening a new door." I answered, gentle but resolute. "Because that's exactly what it is, Catherine. This door doesn't take me anywhere else. It just leads me back to myself." She nodded, eyes warm. "I hope you sleep well tonight." I smiled, looking out the window where the sunset was spilling over distant rooftops. "I'm sure I will." And I was right. That night, when I got home, the house glowed with soft amber light. I lit a small candle in the kitchen, made a simple vegetable soup, and turned on a favorite song. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, listening to the rain patter on the roof. No phone ringing, no keys turning, only the candle's warmth, the food's aroma, and the peace inside me. By the time I went to bed, the rain had stopped. I lay on my back, stared at the ceiling, and noticed my heartbeat steady, unhurried. For the first time in decades, I truly slept. No dreams, no jolting awake, no lying there, scared of the door opening. In that sleep, I dreamed of the sea, but not Santorini, a Texas beach I used to visit when I was young. I stood alone, barefoot on the sand, waves at my heels, the sky clear and blue. I smiled, looking for no one, needing no one. The next morning, I made coffee, opened the window, and breathed in the cool air. I knew that in Santorini, Douglas was probably sitting on a balcony, glass of wine in hand, thinking he'd reached the peak of freedom. But he didn't know that at that very moment, I, the woman he left behind, was breathing real freedom. And maybe, in that paradise view, when he raised his glass and laughed with Aaron, the wine in it was being poured over the ashes of himself. I smiled, took a sip of coffee, let the warmth move down my throat, and said softly to myself, not with resentment, but with absolute serenity. "Thank you, Douglas. Because of you, I learned what freedom is." That afternoon, the Texas sun burned hot. I sat in the wicker chair by the window, reviewing the final asset agreement Catherine had sent over, each line neat and clear proof of the freedom I'd won with patience. Outside, a taxi stopped at the gate. The jazz track in the room cut off mid-phrase, and I knew the moment had come. Douglas was back. I heard the suitcase rolling over the brick path, the steady tap of leather shoes, then the door swung open hard enough to make the air in the house shiver. He stepped in tanned skin, salt and pepper hair swept back, white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sunglasses still hooked there. He stood in the living room, chin lifted like he'd returned from a grand tour, wearing that old arrogance, the look of a man who believed the world would sit still and wait for him. I stayed seated, folded the paper, and said quietly, "Welcome back." He smiled, set down the suitcase, voice a bit condescending. "Yeah, I'm back. Everything all right?" I just shrugged. "All good. Very good." Douglas looked around. His gaze caught the small changes only someone who'd lived here long would notice. The wedding photo gone from the shelf, a landscape painting replaced by my lavender painting, and on the coffee table a travel magazine open to "Women Rebuilding Their Lives After 60. A flicker of doubt crossed his eyes, but he shrugged it off. He walked to the window, looked outside, then froze. The driveway was empty. "Where's the car?" he asked, his voice no longer light. I took a slow sip of tea. "Sold." He spun around, his sun-darkened face flushing even redder. "What? What did you do?" I said, "It's sold. Someone offered a good price. I think you'll be pleased." He frowned and stepped closer, his shoes thumping the wood floor. "You had no right." "That car is mine!" I set down the teacup, my voice still calm. "The title's in my name, Douglas. I bought it for your birthday last year, remember? I simply decided to take my gift back, that's all." He was speechless for a few seconds, then inhaled sharply, trying to tamp down his anger. I saw his jaw twitch. "Fine, I won't argue. You still have the secondary card, right? I need to pull some cash." He took out his wallet, grabbed the bank card, and swiped it on the small reader I use for electronic payments. A dry beep. The screen read, "Transaction declined." He tried again. Same result. A third time his hand started to shake. "Why? Why is it declined?" I smiled and tilted my head, maybe because that card no longer works. "I've locked all your access." "What did you do?" His voice dropped, dangerous. I stood and faced him, my tone as even as talking about the weather. "I withdrew the money, all of it. And the divorce petition has been filed." Time seemed to freeze. Douglas stood stiff, eyes wide, disbelief written on his face. He repeated, choking on the words, "You filed for divorce?" I nodded. "Yes." His whole body tensed. Then suddenly he laughed, a harsh sound pushed through clenched teeth. "Martha, you're joking, right? You would dare do that?" I looked at him, my calm gaze slowly snuffing out his laugh. "I'm not joking, Douglas. I'm doing what should have been done long ago." He stepped in close, breathing hard, Greek wine on his breath. "You're not allowed," he growled. "My name is on everything. I supported you for 40 years. I looked straight into his eyes and didn't step back. "Wrong, Douglas. I don't need your permission anymore. And you didn't support me. We built this together. Now I'm only taking back what's mine." His face burned, his eyes a mix of shock and collapse. I saw something break in him, maybe the illusion that I'd always be there, obedient like a piece of furniture. He turned, strode around the room, muttering, "Impossible. Impossible. You don't have the guts. You—" I cut in, soft but clear. You once said older women shouldn't dream. But I did not of Santorini, of a day I could live without being afraid of you. And today, I woke up. Douglas stopped. For the first time in years, he looked at me without contempt, stunned instead. Maybe for a flicker of a moment, he realized the woman before him was no longer the dutiful wife who bowed to his temper. I calmly picked up the paper and found my place again. If you're tired, rest. The living room still has space for you to sleep. In the morning, your attorney will receive the papers. My attorney? He repeated, voice hoarse. Yes, because from now on, everything between us goes through attorneys. Douglas looked around the house again, the place that used to be his kingdom. But now, nothing belonged to him. Even the air no longer carried his old scent of control. It held only lavender and the quiet murmur of jazz from the speakers. He clenched his fists, his lips shaking like he wanted to say something but couldn't. Finally, he managed one line, "You'll regret this." I smiled, lifted my head, and said as calmly as a blessing, "No, Douglas. For the first time in my life, I don't regret a thing." I sat back down and kept reading. He stood there, rigid as a statue, then turned, opened the door, and stepped out. The door shut with a hard click. A gust of air slipped in, rustling the newspaper in my hands. I looked out the window and watched his figure fade. A sun-browned man in a dusty white shirt, walking fast like he wanted to run from a place that used to be his. I felt no pity, no glee, only relief. I took a small sip of warm tea and smiled to myself. Everything Douglas had tried to grip, money, power, control, had evaporated like smoke. And there I was, the woman he'd called weak, sitting in my own home, peaceful, self-possessed, and free. And in that moment I realized no scream is louder than the silence of a woman who has stopped being afraid. Douglas turned back and stopped in the middle of the living room. Light from the doorway fell across his tanned face, but there was nothing radiant in it, only collapse, spiderwebbing under pride. He looked at me, eyes bloodshot, then roared like an animal cornered, "You are nothing without me, Martha." The words slammed into the room, bounced off the walls and thinned into air. I lifted my head and looked straight at him. In that instant, I saw 40 years of my life, dinners I sat through in silence, times he cut me off in front of friends, mornings I woke early to cook while he played golf and called it family burdens. I smiled gently. Not a bitter smile, the smile of someone who finally sees her life clearly. "No, Douglas. Because of you, I was nothing for 40 years. He froze. That sentence made him step back half a pace, as if someone had just slapped his pride. I went on, my voice not loud, but every word landing heavy and solid as stone. I once believed marriage was about sharing, that I was standing beside a true partner. But all these years, I was the one walking behind you, wiping away your footprints, clearing the road so you could keep going. You didn't see me, because you only looked at yourself." Douglas clenched his fists, trying to argue, but the words stuck in his throat. He had never heard me speak this much, and he had never seen me this calm. "You used to say I was old, I was slow, that I didn't understand this world. You laughed when I wanted to take a painting class, when I talked about my little dreams. But you were wrong, Douglas. I'm not slow, I was just exhausted from living at your pace." He panted, staring straight at me. You've changed." I nodded slightly, a brief smile passing like a sliver of sunlight. "It's not that I've changed now. It's that I finally came back to who I really am." The room fell into silence. Only the ticking clock and the clear beat of my heart remained. Douglas bowed his head, both hands braced on the table like a man who had just lost his footing. After a long moment, he looked up, his voice rough. "Do you really think you can live without me?" I looked at him, so calm it surprised even me. "I've been living without you for years, Douglas. I just didn't realize it before." His eyes trembled, as if each thing I said pulled loose another piece of truth he'd tried to cover up. I stepped closer, just enough for him to see my face clearly. No fear, no pleading, only clarity. You said I was too old to begin. You were wrong. I'm only just beginning. The air felt sliced in two. Douglas stood there, breathing hard, his eyes a blur of anger, confusion, and regret, though he'd never admit it. Finally he roared, "I don't need to hear any more." He grabbed his suitcase and yanked it toward the door. The wheels rattled over the wood floor, long and scraping, like the breath of a man who's losing everything. Before stepping out, he turned to look at me, trying to cling to one last scrap of authority. "You'll see. No one will want a woman like you." I answered softly, without anger or bitterness. "Maybe. But I've learned something. I don't need anyone to want me anymore. I just need me to want to live." The door slammed. The hard thud made the teacup on the table quiver. Then, silence. A complete silence. I stood still. My hand rested on my chest, feeling my heart race not from fear, from excitement, from release, from the feeling of someone who has come through a storm and is still standing. I drew a long breath and looked around the room. The house was the same, yet somehow everything was different. No more heavy footsteps, no more breath filling every corner that wasn't mine. Only me, the warmth of tea, and glittering light on the window frame. I walked slowly through each room, brushing my fingers over the table, the picture frames, the half-finished painting. Suddenly everything had a soul, alive as if the house itself was breathing with me after being held down for too long. I opened the window. The wind came in, carrying the scent of lavender. Outside, the late afternoon sun slanted across the wooden fence where a few sparrows chirped to one another. I smiled a real smile, unforced, unhidden. I sat at the table and opened my journal. My hand moved slowly, each word appearing clear. Today, Douglas left. I didn't lose a husband. I got myself back. For 40 years, I lived as someone else's shadow. Now I'm standing in my own light. And if anyone asks whether I'm afraid, I'll say yes, I am. But I chose to walk forward even while afraid. And that is what set me free. I set down my pen, closed the journal, and looked around the house once more. Strange how even today's silence felt different, not empty, but peaceful. I made another cup of tea and put on an old jazz record. The soft saxophone drifted through the rooms. I closed my eyes and listened. In my mind, there were no more shouts, no figure blocking the doorway. Just me, my breath, and the steady beat of my heart. I whispered, to myself, or maybe to the sky outside, "At last, I have a life of my own." And in that moment, I knew everything was truly beginning. After Douglas left, the house stayed quiet for an entire morning. But it wasn't the kind of quiet that makes you feel alone, it was the stillness of a new beginning. I made a cup of tea and threw open every window so the breeze could carry the scent of lavender from the yard inside. The morning sun spilled onto the floor like honey, laying a warm light over everything I hadn't fully felt in 4 decades. I decided to repaint the house. The living room walls, once a tired beige, I changed to a pale sea glass green, the color of fresh mornings and calm air. I hired a few young painters to help, and together we moved furniture, laughed, and debated paint. Swatches. When the new coat dried, the room felt entirely different. Brighter, wider, alive. I replaced all the old curtains, those heavy drapes Douglas favored to block the sun with sheer cream panels that let the afternoon breeze move gently through. Then I hung my own paintings on the walls, imperfect, uneven, but born from quiet afternoons at the window, my hand a little unsteady on the brush, and my heart at ease. Each canvas told a small story. A lavender vase, a wooden window frame, or simply the blazing sky I watched every evening. For the first time, this house reflected who I am, not the frame he built to display stability and success. I replanted the back garden. Lavender, white daisies, herbs, and a small row of climbing roses along the fence. Every morning I watered the beds, inhaled the damp soil, and watched the sunlight prickle on the dew. Something in that sight softened my chest as if nature itself was wrapping me up, saying, "Welcome home, Martha." A few weeks later, I decided to travel. Not with anyone, not waiting for an invitation. Just me and a small suitcase. I chose Colorado, a place I'd dreamed of when I was young, but Douglas always brushed off because the mountains are cold and there's nothing to do. I booked a ticket and rented a little cabin near Estes Park. As the bus climbed the winding pass, I looked through the window. Snow dusted the far peaks, and dark green pines stretched to the horizon. No one beside me, no orders, and for the first time, I felt light all over. I spent mornings walking the lake and afternoons writing on the porch of the wooden cabin. I titled my notebook, "The Age of Freedom." I wrote about small moments, the wind in the treetops, the smell of morning coffee, the feeling of stepping onto a trail littered with dry leaves. The lines weren't fancy or philosophical, just the plain truth of a woman relearning how to love her life. I wrote, "When people say old age is the time to rest, I know they're mistaken. Old age isn't a period at the end of a sentence, it's a chance to rewrite the pages someone else once took from you." One evening, I video called my daughter Emily, who lives in Seattle. When the screen lit up, her mouth fell open, and then she beamed, "Oh my gosh, Mom, you look more radiant than ever. What did you do to your hair?" I laughed and touched my short, newly cut, slightly wavy silver hair glinting under the light. "I just let the old part go. Makes my head feel lighter." "You're really happy." Emily's voice tightened. "I've never seen you like this." I smiled at the camera and said gently, "Maybe because this is the first time I'm living for myself, sweetheart." When I came home from Colorado, the whole neighborhood felt different. Betty, my dear neighbor, hurried over, eyes wide. "Martha, have you heard? Aaron left Douglas." I raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "Yep. Word is he lost his board seat, and his investment outfit fell apart. Aaron said they weren't a match, and left with someone else." I just smiled, poured 2 cups of tea, and said softly, "You reap what you sow, Betty." There was no venom in it. I didn't feel glee or anger anymore, only something close to pity, not for him, but for a person who thought power and deceit could replace happiness. After that, I joined Women of Renewal, a community of midlife women in Austin. We met weekly at the community center to share our stories: betrayed wives, widows, women leaving long, heavy marriages. I told my story not to boast about a victory, but to say this: freedom isn't given by others, it's something you choose. At one meeting, a new member, Sarah, in her 50s and still in tears over her broken marriage, asked me, "Mrs. Martha, do you ever regret it? Leaving?" The room went quiet. I looked around and saw their eyes hopeful, afraid. I smiled and tilted my head. "I do. I regret not doing it sooner." The group burst into laughter, and applause filled the room. I laughed too, eyes wet but light. Not because I wanted applause, but because I knew those words were true. I got home at dusk. The sunset poured through the window, bathing the room in a soft amber glow. I poured a small glass of wine and stepped into the backyard. The lavender was in full bloom, the breeze carrying its gentle scent. I sat in the old wooden chair, watched the flowers sway, and added another line to the age of freedom. Freedom doesn't come from leaving someone, it comes when you're brave enough to return to yourself. The wind chime on the porch rang softly. Far off, the neighbors turned on their lights. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the cool air pass over me. 40 years of marriage falling apart didn't break me. It only made me see my worth more clearly. I'm no longer the woman who stirs soup in silence, no longer the shadow in a husband's. I'm Martha Lane, 65, a hobby painter, a gardener, and a woman writing a new chapter of her own. And if someone asks me, do you ever feel lonely? I'll smile, lift my glass toward the flaming sky, and answer, yes, but it's the most beautiful kind of loneliness because it belongs entirely to me. That afternoon, Texas felt as if the whole world were resting after a long journey. I sat on the porch with a cup of chamomile tea, watching the sun drop behind the old oaks. The last light spread gold across the lavender as it bowed in the breeze. The wind chime tinkled, the smells of soil, flowers, and old wood braided into a familiar song. I realized peace isn't far away. It arrives when you stop chasing it. A light gust swept a few dry leaves across the porch, and in that breeze I heard Douglas's old line echo, "What is your age even good for, Martha? Make soup, keep a cat, don't dream about climbing mountains." I laughed no bitterness, no sting, just a gentle, knowing smile. "What is my age good for?" I whispered into the wind. "To start over. To be free, to love myself." I once thought 65 was the time to shrink, to settle, to count the seasons as flowers bloomed and died. Now I know 65 isn't an ending. It's the opening chapter of a new book, one I get to write, not anyone else. I looked around my home. Everything bore my touch, the paintings I made, the sheer white curtains lifting in the breeze, the plants I tended myself. What used to be his house is now my home. And I've become the woman I once dreamed of, peaceful, not waiting for permission to be happy. I remembered Santorini, the old dream that once brought me to tears. But today, I don't need white and blue roofs on the Mediterranean to feel alive. My peace is an evening cup of hot tea, the violet sweep of lavender beyond the porch, the laughter of the women of renewal on Friday mornings. I don't need to go far. Where I'm sitting is the Santorini of my own heart. Another breeze pulled me back to the present. I picked up The Age of Freedom from the side table, flipped to the last page, and wrote one final line in slow, steady script. I'm not afraid of time anymore. I know that when you dare to live honestly, any age can be the 20s of your soul. I set the pen down and watched the sunset deepen. The light touched my hair and returned a soft silver. I thought of the women listening to my story somewhere out there, maybe in a warm kitchen, maybe in a quiet room at day's end, wondering, is it too late for me to begin again? I wish I could look them in the eyes and say, no, it's never too late. If someone ever told you you're too old to dream, to love, to change, prove them wrong. Sometimes freedom arrives when you stop waiting for rescue and stand up on your own. I took a small sip of tea, the light sweetness spreading across my tongue. In the sky, orange gave way to deep blue, and the first stars began to blink. My heart felt full not because of the past, but because right now, in this moment, I am living for real. Softly, as a closing line to myself, at last, I have a life of my own. No longer somebody's wife, no longer someone's shadow. Just me, Martha Lane, the woman once called, too old to begin, beginning again in the best way I know. I looked to the horizon, then turned to the small camera on the table where I record these little talks. I smiled, my voice slow and warm, like speaking to an old friend. Thank you for listening to my story. I always want to know, where are you listening from? Texas, Florida, or halfway across the ocean? Leave me a comment and tell me. And if this story touched you, if you saw yourself in me, please hit like, subscribe, or share it, so other women can believe it's never too late to choose themselves. Thank you. From the bottom of my heart, from Martha Lane. I shut off the camera but stayed put, listening as evening settled in. On the table, a small candle burned quietly, releasing a soft vanilla scent. I watched the flame tremble and smiled, whispering to myself, "That's right. It's never too late." And in that candlelight, I saw clearly the woman I've become, not perfect, not young, but strong, gentle, and free. A woman who knows that sometimes the most beautiful light in life doesn't come from the sun, it comes from the little flame you lit for yourself.